Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this Twitter space conversation on a very relevant topic. We have convened together today to talk about the Saudi Arabia-Iran deal, which we've now learned was brokered by China. I will be your host for the duration of this conversation. My name is Dr. Christine Sequenzia. I serve as co-chair for the International Religious Freedom Roundtable campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws, and also have the opportunity to serve as policy director for the National Association of Evangelicals. On behalf of the International Religious Freedom Campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws, we want to thank many of you for your deep commitment to freedom of religion for all of humankind, including for persecuted minority religious communities around the world. And where we at the campaign intersect with this very interesting conversation is that for the last year, maybe 2 years, we've been working on a series of resolutions in the United Nations, basically to repeal the death penalty for blasphemy and apostasy. We understand that repealing blasphemy laws on a whole is going to be a very long and arduous task, not to mention upend certain cultures whose laws have allowed certain things for so long. But one area that we feel like at the campaign that we can affect is repealing the death penalty for religion or belief. So the two resolutions that we are working on in the United Nations, were voted on in committee in November, and then as a whole in December and passed, were one, a moratorium on the death penalty, where we were able to get um, human rights language added into that moratorium resolution. But more importantly, an extrajudicial resolution was able to add specific language for freedom of religion or belief in that resolution. So essentially, nation states, mission offices were able to vote in favor that they also agreed that killings that happened extrajudicially, this means outside of the court of law, that were done as a part of one's belief or lack thereof, would be condemned. Those deaths would be condemned by government actors in those nations. So we were very excited to see that happen. So just by way of background, we believe it is critically important to urge Afghanistan, Iran, Malaysia, Maldives, Nigeria, Mauritania, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Yemen to repeal the death penalty for apostasy. We urge a similar repeal for blasphemy charges in Afghanistan, Iran, Mauritania, Nigeria, Pakistan, Somalia, and Saudi Arabia. And so, as you can tell, a few of the countries that I listed are ones at the center of this communication. So, what we understand from AP this morning is that this deal was brokered between Iran and Saudi Arabia to resume diplomatic ties, which has wide-reaching effects across the Middle East and beyond, and reduces chance of armed conflict between regional rivals, which seems like a good thing on the outset. Also, both Saudi Arabia and Iran are deeply embroiled in Yemen's years-long civil war, according to AP. Saudi Arabia entered the conflict in 2015, backing the country's exiled government, while Iran was backed by the Houthi rebels, who in 2014 seized the capital, Sana'a. Diplomats have been seeking a way to end the conflict, which has spawned one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters, and we have been keeping a close eye on what's going on in Yemen, and turned into a proxy war between Riyadh and Tehran. The Saudi-Iran deal may very well boost efforts to end the conflict, which we very much applaud. However, our human rights community sees potential disaster when organizations like Saudi Arabia and Iran band together with other autocratic regimes like China in any kind of deal. So, we're here to discuss that deal's impact on international religious freedom and the human rights of people living not only in those regions, but how that would have a ripple effect throughout. So without delay, let me introduce our stellar lineup of panelists today. We have Ayman Abdel Nour, who is a very well-known podcaster, a Syrian American now. He represents the Syrian Christian Initiative for Peace. We have Entifadh Qanbar, a former Iraqi forces and president of the Futures Foundation and regular commentator on many cable news networks. We have Hoon, who comes to us from the Committee on Present Danger. We have Miss Soraya Deen, a lawyer and community activist, and also founder of the Muslim Women's Speakers. And then last but not least, we'll hear from Mairiam Ibrahim, who is a very well-known survivor, Sudanese by background, but also a survivor of the death penalty out of Sudan, and was freed after many years in prison, where she even gave birth to her second child in prison as a part of her death penalty sentence. We have seen, thankfully, great movement in Sudan as they recently have repealed the death penalty for blasphemy, which is a part of why Miss Ibrahim was eventually freed. And so we continue to urge similar repeal in 11 Organization of Islamic States. But today, let's welcome our panelists and dive right into the details of this conversation and its impact on international religious freedom and human rights. First, let me welcome in Ayman Abdel Nour, well-known podcaster representing the Syrian Christian Initiative for Peace.
Thank you, Dr. Christine. I just want to give the background and the umbrella which under it the negotiation and the agreement was signed between Saudi Arabia and Iran. This is not the first time there were a country that tried to broker a deal between Saudi and the Iranians. There were 5 or 4 rounds of talks in Iraq and also from Sultanate of Oman. But both countries, they don't have the size and the leverage in both countries to at least to guarantee the deal or to reach at the end an agreement. The new, in our case now, that China is a big importer of oil from both Saudi and Iran, and also a big exporter for a lot of goods to both. And it has good relation with both of them. So this is which put China in a unique position to be able to pressure or to amend or to broker that deal, which was signed in Beijing, in the capital of China. That was the idea came from the Chinese president, who was invited to Saudi Arabia to the Gulf state and China summit last December. And then the second day, Iran issued a statement accepting that role for China. So this is how it starts. It doesn't mean Saudi Arabia has shifted the orientation towards China instead of US, no. But it for sure sent a big sign and a big signal to the US administration that it was very weak in dealing and protecting the Saudi strategic situation, and that the administration was very weak in dealing with the big threats that Saudi faced from the south, from the Houthi, who sent a lot of drones to destroy many cities and big missiles, and from the north, which Iran sent drones also to attack Aramco, the biggest oil producer in Saudi Arabia, and they launched it from Iraq. So also there's many things that criticism towards the Saudi government came from US, and that puts it in for the first time from decades into this bad situation. So they say, no, we are planning to develop our country in 2030, and our new plan is 0 problems with all our neighbors, and we want a stable Middle East. So we will have 0 problems. This is why they renew the relation with Qatar and with Turkey, and now with Iran. They solve all those problems in the last year in order to save the money and to spend it on to develop their own society and to develop the economy, non-oil economy sector in Saudi Arabia. This is why they invested also in putting last week $5 billion in the Turkish central bank in order to support the stability and the independence of Turkey. So this is the message. And also with Iran, one of the main factors that if Israel attacked the nuclear facilities in Iran, Iran announced many times in the last few years that it will hit back some US bases and some Gulf countries. So with this, Saudi opening relations, and after 2 months they will open the Saudi embassy in Tehran. They will put themselves in a position that doesn't allow Iran to attack them if there's anything happened between Israel and Iran. So all those factors played a big role in this agreement.
We did lose a bit of Mr. Nour's initial remarks as a part of our Twitter Space conversation. It seems as if the conversation was hacked, which shows what an incredibly important conversation this is to have. We ended up finishing the conversation on Zoom, which is where we will dive into now. So we will continue comments starting with Mr. Hoon Kim, representing the Committee on Present Danger. Hoon, I was just actually right before we got cut off, was asking if you might be able to introduce yourself and sort of bring us into reasons why China versus the United States might have brokered this deal. What's in it for them? What are your opinions on it? And let's go from there. You're welcome to speak, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Christine, and everyone else for joining this very, very important podcast. So let me just get right into it. So very, very good question. And I think before I answer that, I need to give a bit of a background on this entire deal and what it means for the rest of us. And believe it or not, this decision actually, this whole event actually impacts every single one of us live today. And the reason is very simple. So back since the Obama administration, one thing to remember is that the Obama administration had a very, very interesting, but at the time, what probably sort of made sense to a lot of people, which was a policy to slowly deviate away from being involved in the Middle East at all and pivot towards Asia, meaning that, the intent was to basically pull the U.S. completely out of the Middle East with the trickle of involvement, diplomatic involvement here and there, and just leave them to do what they wanted. Now, in theory, this sounds great, but in reality, it now sort of spells out a great amount of disaster. And again, let me just point out that I'm not endorsing any any type of warfare. So again, one thing to remember is that the Sino-Wahhabi alliance has been in line for a very, very long time. And China has always been looking for ways to become the dominant voice and quote unquote, the dominant supporter of these groups, whether they come in governmental forms or non-governmental forms. And fast forward to today, we see the Biden administration sort of following in the footsteps of the Obama administration, where they are essentially saying, well, look, we are aware of the deal, as John Kirby actually pointed out during a press conference. He said, "Oh, we were in talks with the Saudis, and we knew that this was going on." Now, all of this happened because of several things. The pullout, the US's disastrous pullout from Afghanistan, and sort of made the countries around Afghanistan, namely Saudi Arabia and others, wonder, okay, well, if the US is able to abandon Afghanistan in that way, what would actually spell out for the rest of us? And as you know, a couple of months later, actually not a couple of months, actually a year later, we see the U.S. losing access to our petrodollars in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia sort of slowly but surely moving away from its traditional alignment with the United States and more towards China. But again, like I said before, this this connection, the Saudi-China and Iran-China connection is nothing new. This connection has been there for a very, very long time, and all of these Wahhabi and the extremist groups that's been operating all throughout the world, in some way, shape, or form, have every single one of them have a link to the Chinese Communist Party. They may be, they may be funded in different ways. They may have some political alliances, or a lot of times they may even be trained actually, directly and indirectly by the CCP itself, militarily and intelligence-wise, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think the other question that was asked to me before this podcast was what is China's relationship with the OIC? Well, I would say the more the specific question to that would be what is China's relationship with the Middle East in general, or with specific Muslim countries that have interests in order to increase their influence around the region. Well, the CCP, through its Belt and Road Initiative and through back channel talks and whatnot, have a history of basically establishing these connections for a very long time, and we see this as the Iran Saudi Arabia China the Iran Saudi Arabia deal, where now China is essentially but in terms of imagery, at the very least, becoming the regional stay in the Middle East. Basically, all of these dictatorships. I mean, I don't need to go into the fact that a lot of these countries are in fact dictatorships, and many of them are now looking towards countries like China to basically achieve not only peace but maybe a realignment of economic structures and whatnot. Now, how does this affect human rights and religious rights in general? Well, I think the gentleman before me pointed out that it seems like Saudi Arabia is opening up, and it seems like there's going to be a little bit more of a religious tolerance. I really hope that that's true, but on the other side, we also need to look at how China has been actually supporting these countries despite the mass violations of human rights. I mean, with this so-called deal with Iran, I mean, this was done with a complete disregard for the protesters, the brave protesters out in the streets of Iran, protesting for their rights, for the not just reform, but an actual revolution where every single individual in Iran would be free. I mean, China didn't take any of those into account. When you see all these Iranian leaders on the global stage given this cretinous, especially for a cretinous for regional peace, this also it also shows that China will do whatever it can and whenever it can to spread its influence around that region, and really it's one of their first steps in order to globally dominate this narrative of which were along the lines of whatever happens around the world, the final say at the end of the day has to come from Beijing. This sounds a little far off, and to many have called it a conspiracy theory. But in a sense, if you look at what China is doing, that's exactly their plan. I mean, they also teach this in their classrooms in China, and also at the same time in a lot of the United Front operations around the world, where they pretty much urge everybody to look towards the leadership of Beijing, and it is scary. And I'll conclude with this: is that this is really scary because we're also see the normalization of tyranny and around that region, and its attempt, and that a specific narrative attempting to take over the free world. As I said before, Saudi Arabia and Iran and all the other countries surrounding it, I don't need to go into the fact that they are they're tyrannical. I mean they are, no matter how much reform or how much progress that they've made. But if if any and anything they do, which goes along the lines of violation of mass human rights and religious freedom and whatnot, becomes normalized under the name of, oh, it's for the good of the people or for the greater good, which I think is what's at least heading towards that way under at least guidance of the CCP. I would say it's becoming a scary world, and once the Middle East goes, then other parts of the world will be at least in the danger of falling towards that path. And so for this deal also, many have said that this is a very surprising move, but to me it's really not surprising at all, because it's something like this was a long time coming. Now, for this specific case, it may be surprising, and it caught me by surprise for a little bit as well. But also at the same time, this mass alliance between the CCP and the dictatorships within the Middle East, South Asia, and Central Asia have been there for a very, very long time. We're just sort of seeing its fruition come into power, and I hate to say this, but the current administration and its supporters have had a great amount of hand on this deal, and so it's something that we should be watching very carefully. I also fear for Israel and all the other countries that have had dealings with these countries on a deeper level, and we're battling the Sino-Wahhabi influence all over the world, and so that. Now, one more thing that I should mention is that for China, this is extremely important, given the fact that now China has always been that industrial power for the last few decades, but another rising industrial power is coming into place in Asia, which is India. India has been under attack by China in many ways. We've seen the border intrusion every single year by China in the areas of Ladakh and even Arunachal Pradesh, and CCP does its very best to undermine the growth of India economically and and the growth of its influence, not just in Asia and all over the world. And for the CCP, this is a very, very serious matter, because a lot of countries, believe it or not, are looking towards working with India, despite a lot of the problems that happens in India as well. But no matter, India is becoming that great alternative that the countries like South Korea, Japan, a very big economic and tech powers especially, are choosing to side with. And I've heard that South Korea is recently trying to join in the Quad. So for the CCP, expanding this type of influence in other parts of the world is very, very critical. And so in a sense, we can also, I personally say that it's sort of a reaction by the CCP, with a lot of countries actually now choosing to side with one of their arch nemesis in the region. And on the other hand, Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, it seems to be trying to realign, is really trying to realign itself with the CCP, and that to mean that they will cut off their relations with the US at all. But the more of a regional influence itself will land with Beijing as time progresses. And I do believe that all these wonderful the promotion of human rights and all of that has been done in Saudi Arabia, in my eyes, it really could be in danger. And for the people of Iran, I personally believe that it may have come to a point where their voices are tempted to being drowned out by the tyrannies surrounding their country. Thank you.
Thank you, Sehun, for that great explanation and background. Really, really helpful. Sorry for the interruptions there, and in our recording, we'll be sure to take those out. Ayman, since you're back on here, would you like a chance to conclude your remarks and/or respond to Sehun at all?
Yes, thank you for Mr. Kim. He elaborate on what is the situation, but the main question till now wasn't answered. Why Saudi found itself for the last 2 years in a position, the weakest time it was the weakest in 7 decades in terms of its relation with the US administration, and in terms of its position, it find very difficult to defend its borders from the south and from the north. So that's the main question that we need to answer. Why it felt like this, and what US did in the last 2 years to make the Saudi government feel that way. And I'm still with my opinion, support what I just said, that Saudi will open more, because this is the path it took, and it's included in its Vision 2030. When Iran, it will go in the opposite direction, and no one is talking about that the 3 countries, China, Iran, and Saudi, most place and the worst countries that committed crimes against religious freedom and human rights. But the Saudi new crown prince, for the last 5 years, he issued a plan, and he's walking on that path. And there's 5 evidences that I just mentioned, including the meeting for the first time with top leader from the evangelical churches in US and Catholic churches from the Vatican and from US, and also giving the first license to start building a cathedral church. And this is the first time ever in Saudi. So we are seeing those. We hope that they will continue. We hope that this is genuine. We hope that they will, will be embedded with the religious freedom and human rights, will be embedded with the Saudi government vision, which is I'm not sure of what I just said in the Iranian government. In the opposite, I think they will harden and they will kill the protester, and they will not answer any demand of those brave women going in the street. Thank you.
Thank you. Ayman. Hope is actually a great transition now to invite one of our female speakers here in Soraya, Deen. As I mentioned earlier, the founder of Muslim Women Speakers Alliance, and has been sort of on the speaking rounds with me, talking about freedom of religion or belief and repeal of the death penalty for blasphemy and apostasy. Soraya, will you tell us a little bit of your background, sort of an interest in this topic, and how you see this new deal between Saudi and Iran playing out? What is its impact on women and freedom of religion or belief, and women's rights in the region, especially now as we're seeing the first female-led revolution in Iran? Looks like we might have about 10 to 15 minutes left, so just to be aware of the time. Thanks so much, Soraya. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Christine, for this opportunity. I'm going to focus with some comments very narrowly on women, life and freedom. For many decades, we know that Iran and Saudi Arabia have been bitter rivals, but they have never rivaled about women. If there was a competition, it was only asking which government could impose more limitations on their females. Both countries, we know, have historically enforced extreme interpretations of Islam on their citizens, particularly their women. The women have borne the brunt of the oppression. Their laws have shackled women through this draconian legitimization of these draconian laws. So we know, in my native country, Sri Lanka, we say, Horage ammageng pena huawagi. That means you go to the mother of the thief and ask her to reveal who the thief is. So when it comes to women's rights, we are so stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea with these 2 countries. Because we know the Iranian government's oppression, dominance, and violence against women was in full display over an improper hijab. And it continues to forbid women from singing in public, riding bicycles, attending matches. Recently the Ayatollah Khomeini even said that female characters in cartoons must appear in hijab. There's an obsessive obsession on the women's bodies. And we, I mean, you said 10 minutes, so I just don't know what to leave and what not to exclude. You know, girls can marry at 13 years and boys at 15. And it can be authorized by a judge in Iran. And we know in Saudi Arabia, in fairness, I have to give some credit to MBS, who has increasingly granted more rights to women. The reason is not because of a sudden revelation. We think it could be because they want to compete with Iran, to one up Iran. And we know when it comes to the record of religious freedom in the 2021 USERF report, you know, Saudi Arabia was in 2004 was designated as a country of particular concern. And that designation continued with some exceptions, exemptions when it came to sanctions. But here's I'm an optimist, I'm an idealist, and I'm a community organizer working on the ground, mobilizing women. And here's my message to the women, you know, we women must advance a new possibility. Saudi women and Iranian women must explore ways in which they can come together in an organic and build organic relationships under state surveillance. And there's a lot of prevention for them to communicate, but I would stress that they must begin. And those of us who are more privileged with way more incredible, unlimited resources and access to religious freedom, we must promote a new dialogue and a new path. And my hope is that this unholy alliance, it might seem, but what choice do we have but to look at this as a setup for a comeback? Let's put it that way. Let's look at as a setup for a comeback. Let's begin. The women must begin a new dialogue and a new possibility. Thank you, Christine.
Oh, thank you for those hopeful words. A setup and for a comeback is definitely what we are praying for and we're hoping for. I do see that we have Entifadh back with us, sir. Thank you for hanging with us. Thanks for joining back in here on Zoom. We're going to patch together the audio. If you can hear us, you are welcome to join in now and take us back to the first question, which was, you know, now we're seeing as of Friday morning this deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, brokered by China. We here represent a subsection of the International Religious Freedom Roundtable campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws. You know, for at least 2 years now, we've been calling out 11 Organization of Islamic Countries for their death penalty for apostasy and blasphemy, and been asking that repeal of the death penalty for apostasy and blasphemy be supported in 2 different UN resolutions, and that was voted on in December. So we're a little concerned now to see this impact of the Saudi-Iran deal, them joining together, brokered by China, and just wanted to know how you see this playing out as far as human rights goes, how peace in the region goes. Give us your opinion, and because I think you're new to many of this group, will you tell us sort of your interest in this area, how you got involved in speaking on behalf of the Iraqi people?
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor for me to be here. Well, the Saudi-Iranian deal that is made through China now, it's basically meant the Saudis are very much hurting from the Saudis bombing their oil facilities and also cities with a great degree of easiness. Not to mention the Houthis and the Shia militias proxies of Iran inside Iraq have attacked Saudi Arabia. Not very many people talk about that. Al-Baqiq attack, which was a major attack, crippled 50% of the oil production in Saudi Arabia for weeks. In 2018, I believe, the drones were flown from Iraq. And the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, basically with Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, that was before he was killed with Qasem Soleimani, basically used the Iraqi space and skies to launch this major attack. And the Houthis have training places and arming places inside Iraq. The other thing, all the terror operations run by Iran are funded by Iraq for the past at least 8 years. I am involved now in a major investigation on the dollar smuggling scheme and money laundering scheme through the Iraqi central bank. And our initial estimates, talking about very conservative estimate through top financial experts in the world and forensic experts in finance, Iran has looted from Iraq for the past, since 2012, estimated $500 billion, that's $500 billion. And it's estimated $20 to $40 billion a year going from Iraq to Iran, to the point Iran is funding Hezbollah totally in Lebanon from Iraq, so is the Houthis. So I heard one of the speakers said Iran will save money from the Houthis. Iran is not spending on the Houthis. Iraq is spending on the Houthis, is going through Iran though. So the second thing is, it seems to me there are some signs that Iran may be that they are very much worried by an Israeli very imminent attack on their nuclear facilities. And that's why breaking a deal with Saudi Arabia at this time will give them more energy to face this imminent Israeli attack. And I think they wanted to kind of have a truce front with Saudi Arabia to get more involved on this possible imminent attack, after many reports shows that 86% of enrichment of uranium has been reached. Also, Iran got through this deal, Sokhoi 35, kind of advanced military jets from Russia, which Iran was desperate for. I served in the Iraqi Air Force 5 years, so I understand very well those Russian jets, and they need those jets very much, after their ailing Air Force, which is basically leftover from the Shah, the F-14s. The other thing is Iran, through this deal, was able to secure China's approval that none of their proxy militias will face any pressure or will be abandoned or dismantled. The speech of Hassan Nasrallah 2 days ago was very, very clear. He said, this is a positive move for this arrangement between Iran, but this will not affect us. We have been assured, I can't remember exact wording, this will not affect us. And I also heard from sources inside Iraq that those militias were assured by the Iranians that this deal will not include dismantling or disarming those militias, whether in Iraq or in Yemen or in Lebanon. So basically, Iran put these militias right now against Saudi Arabia on hibernation until they pass through this obstacle. The problem with Saudi Arabia is they are dealing with the issue of the Houthis from the Yemen-Saudi border. The danger of the Houthis do not come only from Yemen border, it's also, as I said, very clearly coming from Iraq. Since MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, has been in power, and I have very strong friends, American friends and non-American friends, who are very much involved in the Saudi politics. The progress has been made in Saudi Arabia in the past couple of years is unimaginable. It's a miracle. Nobody would ever thought this could have ever happened. My friend Avi Yoresh, he's an Israeli American famous writer. He called me. He said, I am in Medina al-Munawwara with a group of Jewish rabbis in Saudi Arabia. This is unprecedented. I think we should give a lot of credit to Mohammed bin Salman for this progress. In addition to the religious oppression, which we all vehemently oppose and condemn, no one should be killed or prosecuted or tortured because of his religious beliefs, no matter what. I think there are two important things to indicate. Also, there is another catastrophe, which is the so-called honor killing of women, which they are killed based on simply suspicion from their father or their brother in a very brutal way. Some of them are burnt alive. Some of them are shot in the head. And I have helped a friend of mine, a Swedish diplomat, who she is a special envoy in Iraq and the Middle East on this issue. And she told me some horror stories. One of the bright sides, or somehow bright sides, is the Kurdish government has changed the laws of honor killing, that because the law that most of Middle East countries, the man who killed his wife or daughter for so-called honor, it does not get any serious punishment. They basically get a slap on the wrist, maybe 6 months or a year in prison. And Prime Minister Masroor Barzani thankfully changed the law and made it just like any other murder, which could be capital punishment or life in prison, whatever it takes. However, some judges in Kurdistan who are Islamists, they basically release some of those killers and try to clear them of their this heinous responsibility. I think the oppression of religions in the Middle East has a lot to do with terrorism and with Islamist extremism. And I am, as a Muslim, I'm ashamed of this dark side of Islam. And I don't think that we're going to see a fast solution to this problem in the near future. But I think the presence of a country like Iran with one religion, Walayat al-Faqih type of rule, you are not going to see a progress in the Middle East, because a Shia extremism will incite a Sunni extremism, not to mention Iran, and this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a very bitter reality. Iran has basically used the pretexts of ISIS to basically change a demographic change in Iraq and basically obliterate Sunni areas and create what we call this Sunni areas of a land without people and a people without land. And this demographic changes are also creating huge problems in Iraq. There's over 1 million Arab refugees from Syria and Iraq, Arab Iraq, in Kurdistan region, nurtured and taken care of by the Kurdish government. And also in Kurdistan, something also we have to feel the support for is now in Erbil, the capital of Kurdistan, the highest concentration of Christians in the Middle East. All Christians from the Middle East, especially Levant, like Syria and Iraq, have fled to Kurdistan. And they have been protected by the Kurdish government. But not very much credit has been given to the Kurdish government, nor much help has been given to the Kurdish government. It's quite the opposite. Baghdad, with the pressure from Iran, from Tehran, cutting off the budgets of the Kurdish government, their fair share, according to the Iraqi constitution, 13% of the oil should go. So, and they are dragging their feet, not paying the Kurdish government, putting this area under tremendous pressure with this large amount of Christian and Arab refugees. I think one of the major fundamental problems in the Middle East, and we must find a way to solve it, is to get rid of the Iranian regime, is to limit this heinous regime to meddle in the Middle East, as we see in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Saudi Arabia. All these areas are meddled by, unfortunately, the lack and the absence of the US role led to this agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, without any conditions to stop Iran from its empowering its militias and terror apparatus, plus building a nuclear weapon. Last thing, I'm hearing from Baghdad that the Iranian government is using the means and ways of the Iraqi government, such as the Ministry of Defense, to buy weapons from China and other countries and to empower the PKK, which is a North Korean style Kurdish terrorist organization, which is now they want to use against Turkey and against the Kurdish government in Kurdistan, more destabilization. Iran cannot thrive, or the mullahs of Iran cannot thrive without destabilization in the Middle East, and we must all come to consensus to deal with that and stop it. Thank you.
Well, those are great remarks. I really appreciate you bringing up honor killings as well. I know we had talked about that in person in Washington, D.C. Honor killings would fall under the extrajudicial killings resolution that we did get passed as a part of the United Nations General Assembly last December. We were excited to see that freedom of religion or belief or language added to that resolution. Again, thank you for your comments. And you also mentioned Kurdistan as a region, really excited about the religious liberties that have been placed there. Well, we now have the special opportunity to hear from our last guest, last but not least, Ms. Mairiam Ibrahim. Mairiam is a Sudanese survivor of the death penalty. As we mentioned at the top of this program, Sudan recently repealed the death penalty for blasphemy, which is what we've been advocating for in the 11 Organization of Islamic Countries, and she is a survivor. So Mairiam, take it away, cap it off for us.
Dr. Christine, for hosting us today. I am truly grateful for your voice and the others who are joining as well. From my point of view, I really am very deeply concerned about a lot of things that will result from this friendship. It's not just about relationship between two different countries. Saudi Arabia already way far from being mentioned or from being called out by the international community, despite all this human rights violation, women's rights violation and abuses that the country actually known for, but it's never really been discussed as a high level as it is like in Iran or in China. And for now, having both countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, it's still not like it last, confirmation of the friendship, because they have too many differences on the past, and too many issues that, Iran is a Shia state and Saudi Arabia is a Sunni, and they're both, from their perspective, the other one is blasphemous, or other country, or other individuals that are for Sunni, Shia are blasphemous, and for Shia, Sunni are blasphemous. So it is very complicated situation, but at the end, they are both, now we see they are supportive for each other, and China in the middle. After Iran deal, China now the peacemaker for the Middle East, and they both have their personal interest on the situation, and the human rights violation and abuse that is happening in the three countries is way far as being called out, as I said, by the international community or especially the UN. And I'm very concerned that they will use these influences now, not just to convince the international community that they are the good guys, but they also will come after those who speak the truth, or call them out, or especially the advocate, and no matter where they are at, and if either it's the people still in Iran, like the protester, or in Saudi Arabia, or people in the Western, because when this friendship, they're going to make sure that they have support on the West, which they have the money, they have the power, and they use these influences for lobbyists and other influences on the international community. Just seeing the way now during the Human Rights Council how Iran is being praised, and how Iran have more of an opportunities to speak of themselves and to say about the thing that they are, the positive things that they are doing, which is way far from the truth. Saudi Arabia is not different than that, because when we come to the friendship with the West, Saudi Arabia is very well maintain their relationship with the Western world, not like Iran, not like mostly China, but they have so many good allies on the Western side. So this is something we should be concerned of, especially from human rights and human rights field, or religious freedom. So because when we say Saudi is is showing improvement, it's actually not true, because just have someone convert, or have a girl that went to go and marry without her family's permission, and see how they will respond to that. Just like when Taliban started taking over in Afghanistan, and the first thing they said, when women are submissive and they're listening and following the rule, we're happy. And then the woman will be happy. But women, if they decided not to follow the rules and not to obey the law, then they will face violence. It's clearly that they are, stating that they are going to enslave women. This is exactly what's going to happen. It's happening in Saudi Arabia, because you submit, you comply, you won't get in trouble. But if and now in Iran, you see people are quiet, a little bit of challenging for some individual. As soon as women and girls took out the street and started protesting, the government came after them, and that's the killing the protester and arresting the protester. It is not a good sign for any improvement. And if it's ever happened, people start going on the street or protesting certain laws, certain circumstances, situation in Saudi Arabia, I believe 100% Saudi Arabia will have the same response as Iran and in many other, countries in the region, like what's happening in Sudan. So the more now they have this authority, and they have the oil and the money and the power, they have more control in specific countries, especially in Northern Africa and other Middle East countries. So this is, I would say again, it's still the deal is not the end. They still have 2 months. We will see what's going to happen during this time. But they have to be questioned, I think, by the international community, whether there is real change is going to happen, because they try their best to make sure that their picture is clear and it's nice on the eyes of the world, but the reality is totally different, and that's their policy. This is the way they always, the way they enforce that. They make sure that the activists and the people who speak out and call the corruption or violation, for human rights violation, are being silent, and that is what's going to happen. I think, especially when Saudi Arabia in the middle. So.
Well, you're exactly right, Ms. Ibrahim. Thank you for bringing that up. We do understand that appearances aren't always the full story, and that's exactly why we've convened here today for this very important conversation. Now, for our listeners who would like to stay abreast of these issues and keep in contact with the campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws, we invite you to follow the Earth Secretariat and Earth Roundtable both on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. We invite you as well to sign on to a campaign which houses our charter for the International Religious Freedom Campaign to eliminate blasphemy and apostasy laws by clicking nae.org/take action. I've been your host for this conversation, Dr. Christine Sequenzia, and we hope to see you guys again on another conversation very soon. Thank you so much.